All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our May NECI webinar, National Extension Climate Initiative webinar. I'm James Shope. I am the chair of the Curriculum Working Group here at NECI, and I also lead our webinar series here. So today I have a really cool, interesting speaker, Frank Niepold, who is the Senior Climate Education Program Manager at NOAA's Climate Program Office in Silver Springs, Maryland. He co-manages the NOAA CPO Communication, Education, and Engagement Division and co-leads the Climate Ready Workforce Program and has served as co-chair and chairs of a whole bunch of different committees, reports, documentations, which you can read about in the bio that's attached to the registration with this. But I'll let Frank actually introduce himself in more detail, but please take it away whenever you're ready, Frank.
Sure. No, it's funny, Nikki. I always refer to you as NECI. I mean, I've been tracking your work for a very long time, because in my capacity, my charge when I came to NOAA in 2005 was to make the nation climate literate. We had no frameworks. I was a formal educator, mostly K-12, and I've had to learn every form of education there is. Extension is one of the really important forms of education. That so finding respect and understanding and being more of a coordinator as opposed to a program manager, even though my title says that, it's been a joy for 20 years. And so I've had to work with every kind of community and initiative you can imagine, because that's what it takes. That's why this topic about networking, hub, backbone, coordination architectures is such an important part to my work, because the complexities are tremendous, but that doesn't mean you can't make progress. So, I mean, that's probably a good enough sense of where you are. And I was funny when I was thinking about today, Mike Liffman from Sea Grant was one of the NOAA leaders that really started showing me the power of extension in a much deeper way. So, and I remember the 2010 NIFA Sea Grant work on climate extension. And like, what is climate extension? How is it different than land grant versus sea grant? And it's an emerging form of extension. So, I'm a student with you. I'm not as learned as those who are on the call today, but I definitely appreciate and value this community and NECI, which now I know how to say it, which I appreciate. That says that I've finally arrived. So nice to be with you.
So maybe Frank and I talked with some others ahead of time about how to do this webinar. And I'm David Kay, by the way. I'm chair of NECI, National Extension Climate Initiative. And I had seen Frank give the version of this talk to the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, which is what got me very excited about bringing him here. And the format that was used with ASAP was not exactly a full dialogue, but it was somewhat of maybe almost an interview conversational format with someone else.
Yeah, that's it, David. Just a conversation. So,
yeah,
I mean, I think that works.
So we're gonna try and kick it off that way. And one of my goals will be to try and push you to finish early enough in the conversation that we're having so that there are other people that can join the conversation at the end. Okay, so without further ado, the first thing that I think would be very useful to talk about before we get into some of the very interesting terms that are part of your title about knotworking, infrastructuring, and so on is, could you talk a little bit about what you are thinking about when you think about climate capacity, what it consists of, why it's important, and how it relates to networks, which we really are. NECI is really a network. So networks and collaboratives as we're thinking about capacity building in this space.
Sure. So, I mean, capacity has grown in my sphere immensely over the years. Thinking about just capacities, and then what are the modalities in society that build capacities? And so, it happens in all forms of education, all forms. And there are so many forms, even new forms that have been evolved over the past couple of years. Um, Training, workforce development. So I'm a training, workforce development, and education person working on climate for the U.S. government. I did start there. But when you think about, do we have the capacities to do the work that relates to climate, whether it's on the observation side, the mitigation side, the modeling side, and then the applied side. And so one of the things we're learning in my work now on workforce development is the work of dealing with all the actions that come with climate is we do not have that workforce. We do not have it. And so, we've been doing the planning, we've been doing the financing, we've been doing the R&D on this solutions, interventions, but just nature-based solutions by itself. We don't have the people to do that work. Full stop. We have parts of it, but I mean, one of the things that's been really exciting for me for the past couple of years since November of 22 is to really start thinking about what skills, what abilities, what knowledges, and I'm talking about applied knowledges, not abstract knowledges. And so I was the lead of the Climate Literacy Guide from 2008, 2009, 2024. We're not talking about what's in that thing. We're talking about something altogether different. And so, what I'll give you an easy example just to make, I find this is so much easier in concrete. Nature-based solutions, the first job is seed collector. Seed collectors is a skill that is part of that capacity. Do you have the capacity to go in and collect species and then bring them to a nursery and grow them so you can put them into human systems to create nature-based solutions? That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about now, not do you understand the carbon cycle and the CMIP 5, 6, 7 model runs and all that stuff. You need that too, but not everybody.
And could you clarify just to make sure that so you're talking about this partly in terms of the ability to do the necessary work. Are you talking
Mm.
about society wide, within higher education, within the government? What's the parameter when you're really thinking about this in terms
We're
of
talking society.
okay,
Right, because I mean, if you think about it, David, what we're talking about in a lot of the work, I've had UNFCCC responsibilities under the Paris Agreement for Article 12 and uh, of the treaty, six of the treaty, 12 of the agreement, right, which is about building education, training, and public awareness, international collaboration, ultimately implied in there is workforce, and we don't have the people to do the work, whether it's in finance, whether it's in risk assessment, whether it's in vulnerability assessments, whether it's in, I mean, especially in rural places where the capacities are even thinner. So if you're in a small town, any state of the nation or a territory, if you're talking about doing vulnerability assessments to really how these mounting impacts going to be a challenge for your community, that's a skill to then translate that vulnerability assessment into, okay, now we're going to start building actions to deal with those, to remove those vulnerabilities. I'm now talking in a fundamentally different way than I would have talked 10 years ago. And I think that's where the field has evolved. But, I think if I'm talking to the extension community, you play a critical role in building capacity at those spaces on these skills that I mean, if you're talking about a New York City or Chicago or a Seattle or San Diego, you're a much more resource and capacity. But as soon as you start moving into smaller places or more less populated places, those capacities get thinner and thinner and thinner. So I don't. I mean,
yeah,
let's remember we're the third most populous nation in the world, and so those capacities are a very strong concern.
right? And I think that is one of the things that we'd love to hear more about. Particularly your perspectives on that, given your situation in your role as well.
Sure.
Recognizing, of course, the cooperative extension system as a whole, while it's sort of founded on has a lot of strengths that are probably dominant in rural America, we also serve urban America. Uh,
Totally.
so I'm going to ask you now about the terms and the literature that you're
Sure.
drawing on, this being a somewhat academic audience. And I'm going to put in the chat.
Well,
Uh,
I put David. I've been working on a document that just synthesizes some of those. So I gave you all access to a Google document where I've just been trying, but you're getting some of the pieces. But so
right.
let's just you want to start at the top of this chat?
Yeah, you can go wherever you want to. I just put in what you had shared from the
Yeah,
previous
yeah.
about some of the literature you're drawing on. But the terms that you're drawing on, concepts are not working, infrastructuring, expansive learning. So,
Backboning.
like, not
Yeah.
everybody on this call is going to be familiar with what that
Let's
is.
get into it.
So let's go for it.
Let's go for it. So I think, and just to preface like how I'm speaking. So I was a climate literacy coordinator for the United States. I was the national communications lead for the United States since 2006 to 2015, no, 25 on the national communications on education, training, and public awareness and international collaboration for the United States. I was the Action for Climate Empowerment national focal point for the United States, the first. Um, I've had all these roles and responsibilities thinking about the complexities of our country and how they relate to the 570, sovereign tribal nations that are inside that geographic space. So once you start getting into those complexities, what you start finding out is that the in-between space is actually incredibly important. So shifting from programs and, like extension or just museums or just schools or just universities or just the space between them is actually really, really important. So I found myself always finding I need to be in the in between connecting things that are adjacent, that are related to build capacity, because capacity isn't built by one. It's not just built by extension. It's not just built by schools. It's not just built by museums. It's not just built by, it's a combination of these things. So the literature, so I have amazing colleagues like Deb Morrison from the University of Washington and others, where we just start talking about what other literature would help us figure out how do you do that skillfully. So Knotworking is a really straightforward idea, but there's literature on how to build those relationships, not just from loose relationships, if you use social networking theory, to actually strong relationships where there's mutual purpose and collaboration can ensue. That's one term. Infrastructuring is the process of building that. Like, what is it going to take to actually not work? So those two things are really adjacent and interesting in how they, and then if you go to the Stanford work on collective impact, another term, collective impact, you start looking at the role of the backbone. And what is the backbone role? How to be a backbone in a hub architecture or a network architecture. So David, you named yourself as chair of one of these. So like that's a role and responsibility in a network. So what I find myself doing is studying almost like an ecologist, like why do networks work and who plays what role in the shared work as opposed to the contribution work. If you just think about this, we all do this, but there's literature that helps us describe how to do this well, so we don't have to start from scratch. So if you think of collective impact, social network theory, not working, infrastructuring, and network, another one that we did talk about is impact network. It's not just a network for a network's sake, it's actually doing something. So those terms kind of start designing an ecosystem of ideas that, like, unfortunately, why I'm curious in this is because we don't actually invest in this work adequately. We invest in projects, we invest in initiatives, but we don't invest in the infrastructure that makes those things even more impactful. So I don't know if that gives you a sense of why I'm interested in this.
Can you just like highlight how why you think this is so important and how you came
Sure.
to that, why you came to sort of like, if you will, shift the way you thought about these issues in your career?
Sure. So, I mean, I was given a massive charge, absolutely gargantuan charge. And so, you could try and tackle it as a program. I will do this and it'll make this impact. What I found was that I was paying for everything, staffing everything, and I was competing with everything that already was. felt like that was the wrong move. So when you have a really, really big charge, what you do is you flip and you're like, how do I build coalitions of people? But in order to do that, you have a lot of relationship work. And if I only think about my relationship and playing that weaving role, the hub, the architecture, the network architect, all they have, there's so much words and verbiage around this, but it's kind of common human stuff. The problem is that there's a scaling factor that limits you. So if you have in education, most of the formal education system is at the state level. Well, we have 50 of those, plus territories. The complexities get beyond us really fast. And so you're starting to be able to track, and then the relationships start getting dynamic on you, where somebody in a key role comes in and then they leave. And then another person comes in, like I named Mike Liftman from Sea Grant. Mike was amazing. Somebody else took over for his work. Now it's Joshua Brown. And so the dynamism in the space, you need different tools and structures and kind of engineering in order to really work at the scale which we have in front of us. Unfortunately, David, what I've seen is getting traction for investing in network architectures and hub architectures, in not working, convening power, all that stuff. Boy, we as a community just have not focused on the power of this part of the work. And so the simple equation I use is like, if you what you do and I do is each one thing. What we do together, we're still doing those two things. Is it two? Do we get two, or do we actually get a third thing? Because we're doing it together, we now have three. You, me, and the thing we do together is the third thing. Can you get four? One plus one equals four. So you're getting a multiplier effect, a synergy. There's so many words around this, but at the end of the day, because we do it this way, we actually get more impact than if we all just do what we can. And I think that that's really what excites me about this work. But at the end of the day, like we need new tools. So I had an opportunity to sit with Salesforce leadership for a while, and they blew my socks off. And they showed me some of the ways that you can actually, the tools you can do to undergird these theories. These aren't just like academic papers. These are actually workable structures, but it costs money, and the tools are not cheap. So that's why I was very excited about them. And then it was like somebody held this dangling amazingness in front of me, and I was like, "Can I get that?" They're like, "Yes, $3.8 million." I'm like,
Mm.
so what it taught me was it's possible, the literature's there, but it requires investment. So that's where I am right now.
So I'm going to prompt you on two things then next,
Sure.
not from our predetermined list. One of them is, could you just, I mean, the term not working went by pretty quickly.
Sure.
It's a very interesting, powerful metaphor model. Could you just, like, if you will, untie for the rest of us
Sure.
what the term
Yeah.
means? And then,
Sure.
maybe after that, like, I think it'd be very interesting. So here's these multi-million dollar tools that you're referring to. Like, what can they do?
Sure.
That's
Sure.
worth
Sure.
that amount of money. So
So think about let's reverse the order because I think it'll help.
okay,
Slack was one of the tools that was on the table, right? Slack is a digital collaboration tool. A collaboration is a knot, just to make it simple, right? If you and I decide to do something together, like we did, we said the ASAP webinar, let's do it again for NECI. Hopefully I said that correct. So that's a knot. We like, yes, and here we are today. We're doing it. So the ability to collaborate, the tools that enable collaborations, that's the knot, right? You're a string, I'm a string, together we become a knot. So yes, sorry for the dog. I'm sure we can hear them. You can't. But the that's what not working is, the ability to build collaborations and then tools that enable those to actually occur. Because I don't know everyone on the call, and I don't know where you are geographically, but I imagine we're diverse in a multitude of ways. We're not in relationship with each other yet. We could be, but that's the process of building a relationship to do something is a knot. And so if we're building a net, a whole lot of knots, then that's a process by which that it doesn't just happen by itself. It is a process that can be enabled and supported and reinforced. I'll give you an easy example. So in 2007, NOAA gave a grant to aquariums. And I didn't know about aquariums. I hadn't worked with them, and they were talking about how do aquaria get right on climate. And they came together and they all kind of said, well, we don't really do this yet, but we see it as part of conservation education, another really important form of education. And what they did was they said, each of us are going to make a commitment. That commitment was recorded. And then another organization came back in 6 months and said, hey, you made that commitment of how you want to do this. How are you doing? Just the asking of how you're doing is bringing you back to the knot. And then they often hadn't done much, but they were like, but my commitment was real. I just got busy. So like you're starting to notice that the process, these are not foreign ideas, they just have new names. But the process of being intentional about how do we get more done by building relationships and facilitate those relationships through mechanisms that work for each community. So I don't know if David, that gives you a sense of it, but I try and make these things as practical and executable as opposed to academic and cerebral.
Right. Well, we'll hopefully get to open before too long. We'll open up to
Yeah,
other people who might want to follow up. Um,
totally.
but here's another thought was, well, really, how does this help? All of us are involved in doing climate on this call, some form of
Yeah,
climate education or climate related work.
sure.
Most of us are affiliated with institutions of higher education. So, and we all face challenges,
Uh,
in accomplishing our goals individually
yep,
or in not. So, like, how did bringing these ideas in help? How would you say they could help us advance our goals, and
sure,
particularly in view of this particular moment in history and time, which we were alluding to earlier, where
sure.
climate work is, frankly, by some segments of society, under direct attack.
Sure. So I think um, as I reflect on my time in this space, right? What at the end of the day, all of it has come down to relationships. You can do your own thing in your own place, doing your own way with your own people. But that's not generally how climate work works. When it works really well is we find other people in other places that are not near us, but are doing something similar. So like Deb Morrison and I are research partners. We talk endlessly about this stuff. She's in Canada and Washington State. I'm in DC. And so, but these tools, like today, we have tools that facilitate the building of relationships, so those relationships play such a critical role in supporting each other when it's hard, giving access to resources. So I did a change management certification at Cornell. Anybody from Cornell on the call? Oh, there you go. All right, I didn't know you were at Cornell. Oh boy, that e-learning system. I was a little skeptical of e-learning, but I mean, first time doing it, I was like, this is amazing, scales really fast and well, and I had a very quality experience. But what I found in change management, one of the things they were talking about was weak networks. Extensive weak networks, light relationships is actually where you convey power. And all I mean by power is I have a new challenge. I'm trying to do something new. I have new relationships. I can move into those relationships that are doing that work because they're not really strong because we're not working yet, but I can move into it very quickly because I have a lot of weak relations. I have a very extensive weak relationship network and a lot of very, very strong network architectures. That's how I work. I think that architecture is available to all of us if you make the collective move as opposed to the individual tight team move. And I think that's why I think these networks like NECI are valuable because they're sharing and learning networks. Sometimes they turn into collaborations for some subpart teams. But I think that at the end of the day, we're able to do things together that we can't do apart. And we also have each other's back. And when it's challenging, oh, hey, have you talked to so and so? They might be helpful for you. Um, that kind of stuff is invaluable in any time. Climate work's hard. It is, but it requires persistence and collaboration.
So do you have any special thoughts about that? Because what you just said, I would have said would have applied at any time, at any point in history. How about the context we're in right now, where, we, even with the NECI, we have
Yeah,
debates, as I'm sure you're aware,
of
about
course.
can we even use the word climate in certain contexts, or who can, under what conditions? So,
Yeah, I mean, uh, how do I say this? Um, I think the science is incredibly sound. I represent, the largest climate enterprise in the world in this work. I'm not just representing NOAA. I used to be at NASA. I used to coordinate 30 federal agencies on climate engagement capacity building. I've coordinated climate education in the past. Climate empowerment in the past. These are very, very large structures that require durable work. I get it's hard. Absolutely get it. I'm living it myself. But I think the integrity of the work is how do we continue to make progress in this space? Which this is hard. I mean, we're talking about very big stakes here. And so there's a reason why credibility, trust, are going to be enduring values in this work. It's not going to be easy, but that's just I think we all signed up for the work the way we did. But I mean, I do think that as time goes on, we're going to be able to make progress again. But so, like I was saying, right? I mean, part of why I'm so interested in this is when I can't execute, I plan. So that when I can execute, I have a plan. So I hope you can appreciate what you're hearing from me is me thinking about what is the next really important kind of work that I should be ready to be part of that I couldn't do last time. I couldn't get, State Department and the White House to really, really invest in not working and infrastructuring the last time climate was a priority. I tried, and they didn't bite. It was $3.8 million. It's not that much money in the grand scheme of climate work. And yet they were just like, no, 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 I'm like, you missed the opportunity. So deepening, socializing. So David, I deeply appreciate you asking me to be here because I think as we think about what are the smarter plays, better roles, more impactful approaches, how do we measure this? One of the papers that's in that list of papers is the one that Katie Boyd led with me on social network analysis. Oh boy, social network analysis by Casey Bush at NC State. Good Lord, is that brilliant work? Because now you understand your network. Now, I was part of an 800 plus party network, the Clean Network, but we'd never really studied the network, understood the network. Who were the movers? Who were the light connections? How do you move people that are just touching it into the center? That's called centrality. Like you can actually use central networking theory to actually measure the health and the vitality and program your network to be stronger and more impactful. But that requires people and intention and staff time. It's doable. I just got there in 24. I mean, so I'm like, if I had another shot at this, I would work differently. I would prioritize different things. So I think I just share that with you as like, again, we're in a planning phase. We can't execute as big as we wanted to, but when we can, I want to plan. And that's what I'm working towards.
good. So I'm gonna, just as a heads up, I'm gonna try and open this up in about
Please.
9 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, and the thing I'm going to ask now is the difference between, well, I'm going to ask two things for of you. One is, so you just mentioned like you were trying to get a few $1 million of funding invested in this kind of work. What was that money going to get spent on? And then I'm going to ask that maybe what if you had 50 million instead of that? Like what should we spend this money
Yeah.
that builds this capacity And in that context, this is related a little bit to what Roz McCann just put in the chat, but you
Agreed.
might want to deal with directly is like, where does technology fit into this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly,
Yeah.
well, I think that's enough for you to
Yeah.
begin
No,
with.
totally. Um, and I love that question, Rosalind. Um, and I agree 100%. We don't have a technology. And the question is what part of that word technology you're using. What I was looking at investing in were technologies, but they weren't technologies for technologies. They were technologies to build relationships. Um, and so I think that, I've been at this a long time. And what I've found is people who are working similarly, I often am the one who connects them in one part of the government in a city to another part of the government in the city. I'm the one who's connecting these two people and big, you guys need to talk. I do it all the time because I'm finding the relations, I'm finding the people, and then I'm like, how you're like right across the street from each other and you're doing similar work and you don't know about each other. That's an opportunity. But what the technologies I was looking at was Tableau, MuleSoft, um, Salesforce, and Slack as a bundled set of activities that could actually facilitate more convening power and enhance collaborations to get infrastructuring, networking, backboning, hub architectures. But because we're 330 million people, and with so much political complexity. And I don't mean that in a party way. I mean that in just like county, city, government, state, tribal nation. That complexity gets really, really large, and it gets got beyond my ability to think as a human. So at the end of the day, but how do you communicate and build relationships? You do need some digital technologies, but just not the kind that we often invest in, which is like the hard technologies. Um, I don't know if that gets you but that turned out building the data architectures and the relationship architectures and the database architectures. That's work. Um, and we need do people that really know how to build those databases that are about to facilitate relationship.
I will mention in passing that the Extension Foundation has, you know, done as well as they could within their limited resources to invest in a technological platform that enables us to communicate with each other. Whether
Right.
how successful it is, would require some evaluation.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask one more question, I think,
Yeah. Sure.
and then we'll open it up to everybody else and see what other questions we have. So that,
Sure.
well, one question, then another prompt. The question is, you know, we all uh, we all are in our own networks, existing networks, if whether we're employed or not, but most of us are employed within uh, in an educational institution. So
Right.
how does what you're talking about apply to us as individuals
Hmm.
within institutions, as opposed to sort of like, someone like you was in a position that was, in a way, as I understand it, responsible for thinking about these kinds of things at an
Sure.
institutional level. So I'm trying to get back, the way your positionality within an institution, how would you sort of like tailor your message to someone who's, let's say, an extension administrator, as opposed to someone who's a frontline educator in a county?
So I mean, I think it just comes down to wow, that's a big question, David. I mean,
Well,
this is
we can talk about it in your
well.
next appearance if you.
So I mean, I think the everyone has a different role, and I think what I've been working on for a long time is understanding which roles and which plays, and at the end of the day, we're talking about systemic change. Right. I mean, that paper that NIFA and Sea Grant wrote in 2010 on climate extension was talking about an evolution of extension in the nation. 2010, really interesting body of work. I don't know if you can still find that report, but we're talking about changing the way we work, who we work with, what are the goals, what are the objectives, how do we do this? Extension didn't always exist. it's an innovation that came along. And then so climate extension is coming along. You're already well along in some places, but there are other places that haven't gotten there yet. So I think the understanding each of our roles and the functions, and like what I try and do is add value. I am a servant of what you guys are trying to do. I'm not the doer. I'm supporting your doing. And so that's really the way I look at it. I've positioned myself not to be a doer, as more of a servant of others doing, so they can know it better together. Um, so trying to build coherence, collaborations, organizations using convening power and infrastructures. I found that in my 20 years is a really important space that I want to be part of. How do we get the resources to do it well? These are not cheap things. You know, so how do we really help the community is really what my positionality is. So I've been watching you guys for I don't that sounds creepy. I don't mean it like that. But I've been
It wasn't
impressed.
as creepy when you started it as it might be now. So,
Yeah, I made it creepy by saying that. But I've been super interested in your success, and so I watch networks come and evolve and move, and so that's just a super thing. I find it curious as to how networks are, like who plays what role, and what can you do together you can't do apart. So that's finding resources that make that even more possible is what I'm focused on right now.
all right, I'm going to open it up
Sure.
to our audience members, many of whom I recognize, and a few I don't. And I've
All right.
already been getting some side commentary that this was in, incredible.
Hopefully.
Roz, you just came on camera. Did you have any comments?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. I'm not sure what my question is quite yet. I will say I've been in Denmark for the year on sabbatical. I'm still here, and I attended 2 weeks ago or so radical re-envisioning of the community's food system. It was in Danish, but I could follow along a little bit, and there was no preconceived outcome of what the direction they wanted to head. The the county pulled together, the municipality pulled together chefs, farmers, academics, interested community members, all in the same room together, and they they co-created around 10 different ideas of ways that we could directions we could and can in the near future take to improve the local food system. And the municipality, so the government, is going to put funds towards making some of those ideas a reality. I haven't really
Right.
seen that in the US. And in fact, when I apply for grants, especially at the federal level, it's so focused around what are your outcomes, the impacts, and I understand how to do a logic model and clearly articulate outcomes and impacts. But when you're really doing authentic co-creation, you don't know what those are going to be because you're pulling a team together and coming up with those ideas, but you need funds to bring people to the table, especially from a lot of my work is with Indigenous peoples, and it's important to pay people for their time to attend, but to get money to do that is very difficult. And so in my eyes, the system itself is broken. And the social scientists, which many of us on this call are often the ones that are unfunded because of the lack of a flashy new innovation or new breakthrough technology. And when I
I'm
see
with you.
the brokenness in the country of America right now, it's a relationships problem. Americans are lacking in relationships and core values. And yes, I'm deeply immersed in different culture right now where the contrast is so stark. But how can we restructure these opportunities so that it's centered around that? It's a fundamental shift in our thinking that needs to happen.
I mean, I think as I was saying, like plan. for when you can't execute. So when you execute, you have a plan. I think what you're naming, and I think one of the things to remember is I used to represent the US government to international collaboration in these spaces. And so we have a lot to learn from other cultures all over the world. We also have a lot to offer. And trying to facilitate that exchange, they don't really want to hear from us very much for a whole host of reasons. That said, I think that the resourcing different ways of work, because that's we're talking about doing some really different things. How do we do that? Because I think one of the things that this feels like is like the government is driving specific outcomes. That's not really what's going on. Is that this is actually a much more of a ground up adjustment in a lot of different sectors and a lot of different people who are actually have the agency to make these changes. But what they lack is the support to help them do that. So it's not like we're telling them the answer and we're forcing down. That's not how this is actually working. So Rosalind, I appreciate what you just said there about like how would you facilitate that? I think there are places in the United States where I've seen some of that, but it's just too isolated and too much innovation. These are known strategies. They're you could do them well. They have practitioners like yourselves who could play a critical role, a little different than what you used to do. That doesn't mean you can't move into that space. But I think how do we shift these resources so that it can have that kind of impact, as opposed to let's innovate a new grant that meets some federal priority. It's going to have to change. But if we don't name why, I don't think there's going to be the motivation to engage with why could we do it this way instead, even a part. So I'm with you, but I think documenting that learning from all over the world and being like, oh, that's an interesting, we do have something to learn from Denmark. Could we bring that into our cultural context? Sure, because we have many in this country. We don't have one, we have many cultural contexts. I don't know if that's just, I mean, I'm just thinking about what you're saying and I share it with you, but I think
Yeah.
finding what could we do that's new is where I am right now.
Anybody else? Scott, I'm gonna pick up on something you put in the chat that is talking about being particularly interested in notions of community as technology. You want to elaborate a little
Mm.
on what you meant by that and see what Frank has to say about it?
No, if since you put me in a
I
corner,
don't believe you.
Thanks, Scott.
Of course, I just want to first say thank you so much, Frank. This has been exhilarating, and every time Ross has a comment, I'm all over it because I'm just itching for those words to be said. And so I did drop a paper in that we put out last summer that covers about 10 years of relational research work, and it's
Mhm.
designed the words that you're using. If I exchange long-term relationship with not, they're synonymous, right? And this is exactly why I don't have funding right now. And this is why I really want to point to Paul's comment as well in the chat just now. It's a long one, but it's a recent article. So, the foundation of this work that I've been doing for the last 10 years is we started with a needs assessment, but the needs assessment wasn't to ascertain information, data, even perspectives. It was to find out where the long-term relationships exist and then snowball from there to grow out. And the reason for that is because the information gets much more deeply interesting if there is trust, because it's
Of course.
superficial largely if there's no trust. So you're getting very partial information, certainly not a lot of depth, especially
Right.
in random surveys or those types of social sciences approaches. But if you have trust, things get really interesting really fast. And I'll just leave it at that. And so I just am so
Yeah.
stoked with what you're sharing and the way you and David kind of kicked this off back and forth and with Ross jumping in. So I just really want to get back to what Ross has suggested and link that to, I will say in addition to what Paul had mentioned, I haven't really focused centered on climate change. It's not because I've never been interested in using it, but so much is transcends just climate adaptation or climate mitigation. Let's just
Right.
call that a bubble, right? It's not. It's a
Yeah.
cross-cutting theme across basically anything, but it doesn't encapsulate everything. And so I'm much more interested in community-driven endeavors that involve climate mitigation, climate adaptation, or as you said, nature-based solutions.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? So I just find that when we use words like community engagement, we cover all mechanisms of technology, and that's community as technology. Climate
Right.
change is fundamental if we're talking about mitigation, adaptation, and sustainability, but it certainly isn't the only thing. I'll just leave it.
Sure, sure. So but Scott, I think that it isn't the only thing. I think one of the things we're struggling with is it isn't the only thing. Often it's not the main thing, right? It's not the main thing. It's, is this a
Exactly.
livable community? Are the jobs here? And so what, is it a fair community? Is it working? Is it a thriving community? I think the word thriving has been showing in my work a lot more as other architectures around the world. Like the goal is not to prevent suffering. The goal is to actually thrive in face of challenge. Um, so it's a super interesting space, but I think, one of the things as you're talking, I think that we struggle with who's the decider in this work? Who decides? It's a lot of people, but it's definitely not the national government, especially in our political architecture, right? If you go all the way back to the beginning, that's not how this is supposed to work. But I think we also conflate those. Who decides? I have had to learn I'm a servant of the people, literally, but that's what I took an oath to, right? But I mean, I am just a helper of their decision. And I think that's community process. There's some really interesting work about community environmental literacy, that the community has the skills, the community has the knowledge, the community has the decisions, the community. That's not like everyone has to be so knowledgeable. That's not the way it works. And just to bring you back to some interesting work that the Kresge Foundation was doing on influentials. And they actually built a methodology for public health on how to identify influentials in a community. Often the people who have the title of the influencer aren't the influencer. But if they're about 5 to 10% of the population, finding them, because that's where trust is built and maintained. And then working with them is a faster path than trying to create a new trusted person in a community. That takes a long time from what they were saying. So, I mean, public health has actually got a lot to teach us in this work. And I think that we'd be well suited to learn from how they do. I mean, Ed Maybach has been schooling me forever about this because that's where he came from, public health into climate. He's retired, but that doesn't mean he's out of the picture.
I
Thanks
will
I don't
very
know
just,
if that
much.
helped.
yeah, and I'll just mention that some of the work that's happening sort of in the extension climate space is increasingly collaborating with our colleagues who have backgrounds in public health and trying to look at the intersection between public health and climate work. Paul, I think we can read what you said in the chat, which is really about climate. How we talk about or don't talk about how there's increasing sort of pressure in lots of ways to not talk about climate change. And I think about what, Paul, you may want to add to this, but what I take out of this is what's our role in particular as people with academic affiliations who interact with off-campus audiences and talking about the way we talk about climate change. Do you want to add to that, Paul?
Thanks, and I'll be very brief. Frank, thanks so much for joining us. Always
Of course.
inspiring to hear you. I guess my concern, and I've had this talk, for a decade with my colleagues here, is normalizing, particularly in higher education, this idea that we can't talk about climate change. That we have to quote unquote meet people where they are, and
Right.
I guess I've had a problem with that. I recognize I live in a red state, and my colleagues in red states that are threatened by this. But I feel that we have a mandate, a public trust fiduciary, particularly in higher education and as tenured faculty, to normalize this conversation. And I saw this, I was told 10 years ago when I started talking about climate change that I was no longer welcome in certain communities because of my climate activism. I think what a lost opportunity, particularly in 4-H, when my 4-H colleague 10 years ago received a letter from her supervisor saying that she was no longer allowed to talk about climate change in front of youth. That was a missed opportunity. And I think how could the world have been different if we had reached those 25,000 4-H students in our state 10 years ago? If we had a supervisor with integrity who actually said the opposite, how could we have changed the momentum, and elected maybe a John Tester as our senator, and
Right.
changed the course? So we just keep perpetuating this game of normalizing that we can't talk about the antecedents, the problems, and I think that's kind of reflected in this New York Times piece that came out last week.
Right.
That Democrats, again, it's better for us to not say anything at all. So anyway, Frank, if you want to
Yeah,
weigh in on this, I'd love to hear your take on
sure.
this.
So I mean, obviously sitting in the NOAA climate office and representing a long history of work with the U.S. Global Change Research Program, we are the largest enterprise doing some of the best climate research in the world. Um, Whether it's on the observations, modeling, process research, services, you name it. It's a massive enterprise. So the idea that it's like not talking about cancer, right? Like, oh no, there's this thing going on, but just don't talk about it. I'm like, that's not how you would work. Don't talk about smoking. Nope, no, you don't do that. So it's in some ways the same way, but the reason why this is hard is because it was intentionally made hard. But okay, what do we do? I mean, we don't compromise the science. That's how I operate. I was schooled a long time ago in NOAA that trust is such an important part of how we do this, but we don't not talk about it. Now it's really hard for us right now, but at the same time, the reasons why, I mean, we don't compromise the science. So, I think the long-term move for all of us is how do we have a real conversation with real issues, because they're real, and make better decisions together. And I mean, Paul, I know, I remember some of those stories from back in those days. This is not a new hard. It's just a new version of hard. But still think at the end of the day, there are people trying to do better, and some of the impacts that are mounting are really, really, and there are missed opportunities that are happening as a result. And then the last thing I'll say on children, um, I have talk with students all the time, not as much as I used to, but um, and I'll tell you what they're this concern about anxiety and mental health and all that kind of stuff. They're very concerned about this issue, really, really concerned. But I used to give talks, and I would give out a clipboard and I say, it might be 500 kids in a auditorium. Say, ask me the question you would ask me without standing up. Just ask me the what you really want to know, because I know you're not going to tell me ask in front of your peers that question, but I want to know is what that question was going to be. And in 2008, they would ask me, is it too late? Is it us? Is it really bad? Is there anything we could do about it? Things like that. A couple of years ago, they started answering the question. It is too late. It is us. And it is, there's nothing we can do about it. And that is a huge missed opportunity, because by answering that question that way, you don't do anything. You just observe, and that's a missed opportunity. And then the flip side of it is I said, well, if you could learn about this, how would you want to learn about this? Problem solution. They're like, first of all, they go, wait a minute, I don't have any say over what happens in my learning. I'm like, well, what if you did? What if you did? And they were like, well, actually, I would like to learn about this. And I'm like, problem solution? They're like, 30% problem, 70% solution. They really want to get much more into the using this information to do things in society that are meaningful. And Rosalind, that comes back to your kind of question. Let's get into the doing of whatever. If it's food, we're in. Different people are going to be on food, then transportation, energy production, you name it, water. But they're really frustrated with how we've been doing this, which has been very problem focused. And what they're asking us to do is to be very solutions, action oriented, build agency, and get on with it. But what do I need to know? What do I need to be able to do? What are the jobs? Let me get at it. And I think that's that once they get past the emotions of it, then they actually want to get into the doing of it. And I think that meeting them where they are is a really important thing for us, because I'm very like the next generations. I serve people, so I believe that what they're asking for is something that should guide what we do. So I take a lot of direction from those conversations over the years. And it's been true. Sometimes it's 80-20, sometimes it's 70-30. Often it's almost never 50-50. Never. I've never heard of 50-50 yet. So that tells you something about where they are on this. Whether we do something about that is another matter.
So I know
Ooh, we're almost at time.
We're almost at
Oops.
time. So I am going to thank you, first of all, for what I think was a very interesting, thought-provoking session. On your way out, I'm going to ask you two things. One of them
Sure.
is, and they're both about networking and infrastructuring. So,
Sure.
like, I think you could have gave the answer you just gave to Paul without specifically drawing on what everything, sort of the concepts of networking, not
Yeah.
working, and infrastructuring. So what is it that kind of perspective might bring to the table that's a little bit the different slant on how we deal with the
Sure.
ideas of how do we say what we want to say and be true to our science and our responsibilities in the actual world we're in? And then the second
Yeah.
thing on your way out, which you don't have to answer now, but I just want to put it on the table, is how do we in the National Extension Climate Initiative tie the knot more firmly with you and the work you're doing in NOAA?
Okay. So, I mean, um, I think the value of community, relationships, networks, hubs, architecture. Well, all of them are they're just human infrastructure, if you think of it that way. And they all have different values. But at the end of the day, like, look, I've been in so many conversations about strategic initiatives of this topic or that topic or this thing, and we often start the conversation over. New people are coming into the space, they're starting from the beginning, and that starts with, well, we really just need to know the science. Like, well, that was how we thought in 2006. The field has moved, but as you're tending to new people coming into the space, um, they need space to grow and learn with each other. And so that means that they're in relationship. There's knots, there's infrastructure, all that stuff, because we actually figured out how to be in relationship with each other so that the field can share with each other, where are we? Where can we be? And so I think that, there's more people that have left the space than have joined recently. So that means that in the future, we're going to have to tend to growing the field with as much knowledge and learning that we have accrued over the years. So there are times I feel like, I'm holding a lot of seeds, that when the ground is fertile again, that I can start planting seeds. So every time I learn something new that's really important that should be thought of, for me, it's like a seed in my hand. And I want to protect them for the next time the ground is fertile. Now it's not that time, but that doesn't mean that it's not coming. It's coming for sure. But the question is, can we help each other learn as much as we can, as fast as we can, so that we're ready to go that next time we can make a surge and ready to bring other people into the community, so they can learn from us. And then, keep them going. Invitations are kind. I think as we begin to think about this, if you want to get into a strategic space about like what does the climate extension community want to really start thinking about as we move forward, I'm always game for those kinds of conversations. If we're specific, actionable, and impactful, I'm interested always.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's have a round of appreciation for
Oh
Frank.
wow, we're doing that.
Done.
Hey, I'm gonna put it back on you. Yeah. But I mean, NECI, now I know, right? I mean, but
Yeah.
what you guys have been doing this, how long have you guys been at this?
6, 7 years, right?
Right. So like I remember the beginning. And I was actually part of you guys at the beginning for a little bit, right? So like I can't be everywhere, but I mean I've deeply valued the fact that you've been able to maintain the community and the relationships and the network across this time, because it matters. So thank you. I'm going to put that appreciation back onto you.
And I'm going to hand it back over to James then to close us out.
All
Thank
right.
you all.
Well, thank you again, Frank. So this concludes our our webinar for this month. Please be on the lookout for our emails for our June webinar coming up. You can also find a recording of this on our NECI YouTube site. It'll be a few days before I manage to get this uploaded, but by next week, please find it there if you have any other questions or other follow-up, or you just want to watch some more of this. And definitely feel free to send us any questions or anything, and we can try to either help answer or pass them on to Frank if he's willing. But otherwise, thank you all for joining us this afternoon.
You all.
Thanks.